Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank my friends at Hatch for producing this episode. You can get unlimited podcast editing and strategy for one flat rate by visiting hatch.fm. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome to Distribution First, the show where we flip content marketing on its head and focus on what happens after you hit publish. Each week, I share playbooks, motivations, stories, and strategies to help you repurpose and distribute your content because you deserve to get the most out of everything you create. Hey friend, this week's episode of Distribution First, we are diving in. We're continuing our series on the Distribution First framework. If you didn't check out the overview podcast episode we did on the framework, check out last week's episode. But on this week's episode, I want to dive specifically into phase one, which is foundation. This phase is all about creating your distribution strategy. It's laying that foundation, and it's the blueprint that quite literally guides everything else we do moving forward. If you skip this step, you can do distribution. It's just going to kind of be a little bit more ad hoc. It's not going to have that strategic angle to it. And so building the foundation, doing these different things are really where your distribution strategy will start to shine for you, and really where putting the effort in to create a distribution strategy in the first place all pays off. So in order to make your distribution strategy work, you really need two things. You need, number one, you need content worth sharing. If the content you create is garbage, distributing it doesn't really matter. There's no amount of content that you can create that is not helpful or valuable. There's no amount of distribution that will solve that issue. So number one, create content worth sharing. It's probably a whole other show, maybe a whole other series of shows worth doing that. But the second thing you need outside of creating content worth sharing is you actually need consistent promotion. Once you have that asset, once you create that content for the companies who do have really solid content, the next struggle is consistently promoting that. It's being able to promote that 6 months down the road instead of actually sitting back and looking like, oh, hey, we haven't shared that in a long time. Unfortunately, a lot of the companies that I've worked with struggle to do both of these things in tandem. They either create really good content and post about it once, like I said, or they create junk content, share it all over the internet, and wonder why nobody's interested, even when they do promote it. So before you even worry about creating your distribution plan, make sure your original content is in order. But in the rest of this episode, I'm going to make an assumption that you already have at least a few pieces of content that are worth sharing. I'm going to make the assumption that you have product market fit potentially, or at least you have content market fit, where you know the content that you have and that you've created fits in with your audience, and you have something that your audience is excited about. So assuming you have some sort of consistent content engine in place, now is the time that we're going to lay the foundation for your distribution strategy. And to build your distribution foundation, you need three things. You need to, one, establish core messages. Those are the key topics that resonate with your audience. You need to decide on your strong POVs. This is much harder than a lot of companies want to think it is, but you have to have a strong POV in today's marketplace. This is your take on the world. The companies, the founders, everybody that you like, hate, etc. on social media or as a company, they have strong POVs. These are things that you can either lob onto and agree with, or that you can vehemently disagree with. But either way, they have a POV. And I bet you can think of probably 5 to 10 companies and people straight off the top of your head that have strong POVs. And literally everybody else who doesn't sort of just floats away into the ether. So number two, decide on your strong POV. Number three is review your existing content library. So we're going to establish our core messages. We're going to decide on our strong POVs. And now what we're going to do in step three is review our existing content library to see what we have that fits into those things. Before we go and create a bunch of new stuff, we're going to figure out these core messages and these POVs. And then we're going to figure out, all right, what do we have that we can actually use and start utilizing right now, today, this week, that fits into those boxes. So let's dive into each one of these a little bit more. In order to establish your core messages, you really need to know the key topics that resonate with your audience, and you need to know what are those themes and what are those things that you need to talk about. The main problem that companies struggle with when it comes to distribution is not having a consistent message. A lot of times I've audited companies and you go out and you start looking at what they're talking about on LinkedIn and what they're talking about in emails and what their blog posts are on. And then you ask them, all right, what are the core things that you want to talk about in your company? What are the core messages? What are the core topics and themes that you want to be talking about? And lo and behold, you audit that content and almost none of those things actually show up in what they're distributing. And so step one is just aligning your team around the core messages that you want to be known for this year. If you ask that question, what do we want to be known for this year? And you can go back and reverse engineer what that looks like. And then you can work with your company to figure out, all right, how do we make sure that happens? How do we make sure those messages, those themes and topics actually get out into the marketplace? And then that also allows you to use those themes and messages as guardrails to create and distribute your content. And again, that one question that I would ask every marketing leader is, if we could be known for one thing at the end of the year, what would it be? And then reverse engineer your content to be able to make that happen. All right. Number 2 is deciding on your strong POVs. So we've got our messages down. Those are our first level of guardrails. We know sort of what topics, what themes, what messages we want to resonate with our audience. And now we're going to go a level deeper and actually put our POV and our message and our spin on those things. And so again, when you think about it, your topics and your messages and your themes, those are not unique. Every single one of your competitors, people in the space are going to be talking generally about those same things. What's going to make your content start to stand out and make your distribution strategy worth doing is having a strong POV. And one of the first things I look at when I'm breaking down a company's distribution is actually their POVs. And you might be wondering, why the heck are you looking at POVs? Shouldn't you be looking at channels or looking at how many things we should be sharing every week? And the answer is, it really doesn't matter unless you have something worth saying, because distributing content without a POV actually will lead to all sorts of problems down the road. And your POVs will actually determine the topics and the types of content you create in the future. And it's what differentiates you from literally everybody else in the marketplace. And so at a high level, your POVs should be sort of broader messages that you want to get in front of your audience. And they can be pulled from things like your strategic narrative, if you have one, your unique take in the marketplace, problems your product directly solves, core things your audience wants to achieve, all of those type of things. If you want to know more about POVs and some of the great questions you can ask to create POVs, go check out my episode with Erica Schneider. It was awesome, and it will teach you a ton about POVs. But getting back to the show, you want to make sure that your POVs that you choose aren't random. You don't want to just have a hot take to have a hot take. You want to make sure your POVs actually align with your marketing goals, with your company story, and resonate with your target audience. Because honestly, if you just do a hot take for hot take's sake, you're going to waste time and effort creating content that doesn't resonate because it's not really aligned with what your audience cares about. And honestly, you'll probably end up losing a lot of credibility and authority. And that's a huge part of building your own POVs, is they have to be authentic. Authentic is sort of a buzzword at this point, and maybe it's losing some of its steam, but I think overall it has to be true to you, to your company, to whoever is saying it, and really felt throughout. And that takes time to build, but people can see through when you're not credible and when you're not truly authoritative on what your stance is. So whatever POVs you end up creating, make sure that you actually have the credibility in the space to be able to stand up and have those be said on your behalf. And typically I like to choose between just 2 and 4 POVs that can carry me throughout a year. That could be 2 or 3 POVs around each specific topic. So you might have 3 POVs or 2 POVs, 2 strong statements that you have across a bunch of different topics and across a bunch of different areas. But overall, you just want to, again, it's about creating those guardrails. So when you're going to create a piece of content and it's on a specific topic, and you've got a podcast, or if you got a blog post that you're creating, or even a social post, you can look back at it and say, all right, what is the strong POV that I can add into this and be able to actually create a piece of content that is unique, has a differentiated take, and is true to what our company wants to talk about. If you want to get started on this, maybe this is the time, not if you're driving, don't do this, but if you're sitting around listening to this show, here are 5 questions that you can use to start nailing down your POVs and actually weave them into your content throughout the year. So number 1, what are common industry points of view that you strongly disagree with? And these are questions you can use with your founder or your leaders as well, if you want to kind of get their take on these areas, if you're just part of a larger organization. But the reason we ask this question is to find the areas where you can zig while everyone else is zagging. So in any industry, regardless of what you're doing, there is the status quo and there is what everybody else is doing. And somebody in your company, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else, probably strongly disagrees in some way, shape, or form with where that industry is heading. And so just pulling out some of those areas can be really, really helpful. All right. Number 2, how do your services or products solve the pain point for your target audience? So how do your services and products solve the pain points of your target audience? You want to draw the direct connection between your audience's needs and what you have to offer. Number 3, how do you want your audience to feel after they engage with your content? How does this relate to your product and service? And again, we're always going back to how does this relate to your product and service? Because ultimately, why are we creating content? So somebody buys your stuff. So somebody becomes a customer at the end of the day. Content marketing is about adding value, but ultimately it's about educating and building out that to where they eventually choose you or choose somebody else. So you want to find those emotions. You want to be able to have a reaction. A POV should actually sort of be a visceral gut reaction when somebody reads it and they're either like nodding their head in agreement or like shaking their head in disagreement. And so again, it's really difficult to pull some of these out sometimes, but it's really, really helpful. Even if you have to go like far on the pendulum and then kind of bring it back a little bit, that can be helpful too. Number 4, the fourth question you want to ask when you're trying to nail down your POVs is, what are you or your company most passionate about in your industry? So it ties sort of the opposite of what's going on with that first question. So in this question, you want to uncover those areas where you're going to be enthusiastic and authentic in your content. So it's really about, when we're talking about passion, it's about what are those things that you're really, really passionate about. For me, it just naturally occurred. If we look at question number 1, what industry points of view did you strongly disagree with? I strongly disagree with this idea that you need a giant, massive blog and you need to write all this content. You need a giant calendar to be able to promote programmatic SEO, all that type of stuff. Strongly disagree with that. But for me, what I was passionate about is basically this essentialism in marketing and marketing minimalism, where you can create one thing, distribute it and repurpose it really, really well and get a lot of value out of that content. And if you're listening to the show, that should come to no surprise to you, but that's a basic way of how I would think about that. And then number 5 is, what topics do you find your company constantly researching or discussing? So what are those topics that you and your colleagues are talking about, or after you get off a call with a customer advisory board, or after you get off a call with a customer, or somebody goes out and sees a customer and talks to them, like what are those natural areas of interest and expertise where what you know blends exactly with what your audience wants to hear? So hopefully those 5 questions really help you get started as you're trying to create your POVs. If you want to learn more about POVs and have a template and ChatGPT set of prompts and all that sort of stuff, along with the training, we have a full module inside the Distribution First membership where you can literally answer about 20 questions and then enter in a few different custom prompts and be able to pull out POVs specifically for your company or for your business with an entire training around that. It comes inside of the Distribution First membership. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check that out at distributionfirst.club. All right, let's move on to number 3, the third step as you're building out your foundation of your distribution strategy. So if we go back, let's just rehash where we're at a little bit. Step 1 was we're going to establish our core messages. So again, those are those topics, those are those themes that we're going to become known for. Number 2 is we're going to decide our strong POVs. What's our take on the marketplace? What's our take on those messages? We're actually build those out and then flood our content with those. And now number 3 is actually reviewing our existing content. And so if you think about this in a little bit of a matrix, and it's going to be hard in a podcast to talk about showing this visually, but if you think about this in a matrix, you've got at the top level, you might have your messages, and then underneath each one of those messages, you might have specific points of view. And then underneath that, now what we're going to try to do is audit our existing content and try to fill those buckets. And you don't need a lot. Maybe it's 3 or 4 pieces of content, depending on the size of your library for each one of those messages. But what are the things that we would want to potentially repurpose and redistribute that hit on those topics that we can maybe infuse our point of view, now that we've got them figured out, back into that content and then also out into our other content? And this is where the fun starts to actually happen. This is the blending between phase 1 and phase 2, when you actually build out your distribution foundation and start in phase 2, what we'll talk about next week, in execution. But Your job at this stage is to try and resurrect your old content from the dead and be able to use your guardrails that you just set up to help you understand what the heck do we even start with. So what the heck do we even start with when we're repurposing and distributing our content? Now you've got two perfect guardrails set up. You've got your messages that you've all agreed upon and aligned on. And you've got your points of view that you've all agreed upon and aligned on. And now you can say, cool, let's go back and look at what podcasts, what webinars, what blog posts have we done that touch on these things. They might not all be perfect, but you can build that list out. And then from there, you just start. For me, it would be like a simple spreadsheet or a Notion doc where you've got your 3 to 5 core messages, and then you're just listing your content underneath. And then now you've got a full list, maybe probably without much work, you could have 20 to anywhere from 20 to 50 pieces of content that you have as an option to start repurposing and distributing. All right. The final step when you're talking about building your distribution foundation outside of messaging and points of view and content is really understanding your distribution channels. And this should not be difficult. This should not be something that you overthink and you really worry about. Where should we be creating content? So I have a whole bunch of content around choosing channels, and I have a whole workshop inside of Distribution First where we break down how to choose the right channels and gives you an audit and all those type of things. But for this podcast, let's just go super high level and let's think about 3 things that you can take away as you're trying to understand which channels to decide on. We've been doing Facebook for 10 years. Like, do we keep doing Facebook? Or if you got a new channel, oh, we should really do YouTube. Okay, should you do YouTube? These should give you a little bit of a guardrail. Again, all of the foundation is about kind of setting guardrails, because otherwise you could do any message, any channel, any medium. And like we talked about last week, those are the things you need to really rein in and understand before you can have a really solid distribution plan. So 3 things to think about as you build out your distribution channels. So number 1 is just know your audience. Understand where they spend their time, where they're hanging out. If you sell B2B, they're probably hanging out on LinkedIn. If you sell to tech founders, maybe they're on X. If you sell into trainers, they're probably interested in specific training forums. There's lots of different ways, but you're going to know that better than anybody else. So know where your audience is hanging out. Number 2, and this is key, understand the channel. The biggest gap I see with a lot of folks is they just try to blindly use channels, sort of like we've got a hammer. We're just going to hammer everything, right? Everything looks like a nail on social media. We're just going to, bam, we're going to do Twitter. Bam, we're going to do LinkedIn. Bam, we're going to do Instagram. It's like, all right, if you don't understand how to actually use those channels, good luck, because every single one of those has nuance. And so pick a channel to understand and really dive in and take the time to study, to kind of read how that works and watch how it works. I mean, it took anybody who's been on LinkedIn any certain amount of time knows for a while there, it's like that sort of one line sentence, whatever, however that came to be on LinkedIn as a format, but you kind of have to know that and be on there to understand how that works. And then finally, just choose a channel you enjoy. My goodness, if you hate what you're doing, if you hate writing on Twitter, if you hate, why are we posting on Facebook for 2 likes? If you hate doing video and you're trying to shoot shorts for YouTube or for TikTok, if you hate doing that, I guarantee you it's not going to last. And I guarantee you your audience is going to quickly understand that they hate doing that. Either they're not consistent or their content isn't good, or it's going to be found out. So choose a channel that you enjoy. At a high level, I would suggest picking 1 or 2 channels that you enjoy doing, that your audience is on, and that you understand. So as a very basic example for most companies, I think if I was starting out at a blanket, not knowing anything that was going on with your company, I would say, all right, cool. Probably do LinkedIn and email, because I'm guessing your audience uses both of those. Again, I'm just generally here, like most people I talk to in my spheres are B2B. So most of those folks are on LinkedIn and most of those folks have an email address to hang out on. So learn how to do both of those channels well, learn how to be consistent on those channels, and then hopefully you enjoy them, or hopefully you find somebody who does enjoy them. This has been awesome. All about building your foundation and all about building the foundation to your distribution strategy. And now that you have your messages and you have your list of content ready that you're going to amplify, you've got your spreadsheet built out and you know what channels you want to promote that content on, this is where next week we can move into the next phase, which is execution. Super excited to dive in that. So just to wrap the things from today, to summarize everything for you, number 1, create solid content. If you are building a distribution plan, it all starts with what you are distributing. Make sure you have high quality content we're sharing before you even worry about how the heck are we going to share this. Number 2 is get alignment on your messaging. You want to establish those messages. You want to have consistent messages. So after 3 to 6 months, everything starts to feel and look and sound the same. And everybody's sort of like aligning internally and externally around what you're talking about. And that includes your topics, your themes, and your POVs. And then leverage your existing content. A lot of the times, especially if you have a large library, you have some sort of content that you can start remixing and repurposing across those new messages and those POVs. Number 4, choose your channels wisely. Focus on distribution channels that your audience actually uses and that you will enjoy using. And then number 4, get this stuff done, and then you can actually start executing. It's going to be amazing. That's preparing. Number 5, we're going to prepare for the next step. So build your foundation, understand your core messages, understand your core POVs and your core channels. And once you have those 3 things figured out, now we can start distributing our content and actually having some fun. So I will see you all next week. If you have questions, you have comments, throw them my way. And as always, thank you for listening to the show, and I will talk to you next week. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Distribution First, and thank you for listening all the way through. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you're able to apply what you learned in this episode one way or another into your content strategy as well. Speaking of strategy, we have a lot of things going on this year that are going to help you build your brand, 10x your content, and transform the way you do content marketing. Make sure to subscribe to the show and sign up for my newsletter at justinsimon.co so you don't miss a thing. I look forward to serving you in the next episode as well. And until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.